I have 7 minutes left. I want to read you an article from the newspaper, okay? Because did you know we have a whole generation that can't hardly hear the voice of the Lord? Do you know why? An unsaved evolutionist wrote an article in the New York Times. I want to read it to you. It's called Lost in Electronica. Now, this guy's unbeliever, unsaved. George Will is his name. Do you know what he says? We've lost a whole generation of American. This is why. The ubiquitous barrage of battery-powered stimuli delivered by phones, computers, and game makers, the chaos of constant connection, is an addictive electronic narcotic. This is not a youth evangelist speaking. This is a liberal-minded, maybe conservative, but he is not bounded by God's truth. This is an unbeliever noting where we're going. As continuous stimulation, George Will says, becomes the new normal, gaps between moments of heightened stimulation are disappearing. Amusement has squeezed the boredom out of life. Did you know, even in church, when I was in Tulsa, the biggest church in town, they had 10,000 people. If you went to their youth wing, it wasn't a wing, it was a separate building. It was bigger than any building on this whole property. And it was the youth building. And when you went into it, the first thing you saw were 10-foot high, now this dates me, but Darth Vader's and Luke and everything and all the Star Wars stuff. Every student had their own reclining lounge with their own sets for a big screen video game. That was youth ministry because youth could not stand boredom. And so they played video games. And when they would go up and get popcorn and drinks, they'd preach them a little bit, and then they'd go back and play youth or video games. That was the largest church in town. Everybody wanted their kids to go there because they loved going to church. They didn't hear about the Lord, but they were not bored. It's amazing. You know, people pick churches by youth ministries. They don't want their kids to be bored. What they should have done is not sent them to children's church until they were 22 years old. They should have taught them to sit next to them in church and listen. I mean, that's a lost art. When does a child learn to go to church? When they graduate from college? They're gone by then. It's not even in the equation unless they get saved and come back. It's unbelievable. Oh, that's me. Now back to George Will. Hyper-stimulated synaptic mindscape of daily life becomes all peaks and no valleys. What he's saying is they're always peaking out with all this excitement. But the valleys are good for us. The presence of available resources in the valleys lead us to thought, reflection, and civil behavior. Being civil is rarely fun. It requires patience, forethought, and a willingness to tolerate tedium. That's why kids can't talk to adults. That's why kids don't stay at meals. They stuff it and run. They wouldn't think of sitting there for an hour and talking with those old fogies. And you know what? Parents encourage that. They say, oh, just take your meal and go sit in your room, watch TV, and play games. We're going to have dinner together. Why don't they just sit at the table with you? The way it says in the Bible, they should. It says that. Deuteronomy 6. It says, talk about God when you sit at meals. How many families sit at meals anymore? It says when you walk through life together during the day. I mean, we don't even do stuff together anymore, families in America. Back to the unsaved guy. To the overstimulated, civility feels like submission. For a young person to pause and talk to an old person, it's like submitting to them, and they don't like to submit. So civility is gone for the next generation. Will continues. There are some deficits in the communication of young males in America for whom the womb of all-encompassing stimulation, talking about all these devices, has induced a pleasant trance from which they do not care to be awakened. I was just at a wedding, performing it, by the way. And I've done so many, 300, that I can actually do it and watch the crowd. And there were people like this. And I thought, I hope you're not related. You know, you're missing the entire thing. And at the reception, it was the same thing. They sat at those tables all dressed up, texting or Facebooking or something. They are preoccupied, he continues, and do not care to be awakened. Hence, perhaps, the failure to launch of most young males who are preoccupied with self-amusement and struggle to make the transition from adolescent to adulthood is the unbearable lightness of adolescence is not new. What is new is the excess of amusement producing a deficient sense of gravity. they never realize what real life is like. They don't realize how hard life is because they totally control their own world. It's a self-controlled world. He ends with this. He said, the stratospheric increase in diagnosed learning and attention deficits has correlated with the advent of the electronic playground. Again, this is a reputed New York columnist, not a churchgoer. When so many Americans meet the diagnostic criteria for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it is arguably no longer a disorder. It's just the way we've become. Isn't that interesting? I think AHD, whatever. When I was little, they just said I was naughty. Now it's that. Well, he goes on, but you know what he's saying? He's saying people can't think deeply. You know what the Bible says? If you want to know God's will, if you want Him to lead you, you have got to first start by focusing on Him. And you say, you know what? You're worth more, you, God, than this. And so I'm going to turn this off. And until I know you're controlling me, and until I hear your voice that you're leading me, I'm going to leave this off. Do you know what would be a great decision to make at camp? That you will read the Bible before you check your email. That you read the Bible before you update your status. That you read the Bible before you read all of your tweets. And I don't mean just read it to check the box off. I mean read it till you hear God's voice. And when He says something to you, you say, Lord, I want to do that in my life. Lead me. So I do your will. Because who's going to heaven? Jesus said, those who didn't do my will can't come. Because you didn't belong to me. Because you're not my sheep. Because my sheep hear my voice, and I know them. And they follow me. Let's all stand for a word of prayer. As you stand, I am going to pray, and then Paul's going to tell us whatever we're supposed to do next. What would be the application of this sermon? Maybe before you get lost in Electronica, as George Will called it, just pause to say, Lord, am I really stopping everything long enough to hear your voice? I want to. And I want to hear it until your voice fills my mind. And I follow you. I mean, that's a great, just say, I want to do that, Lord. You'd be surprised what He'll do to you. Maybe your battery will go dead. Because He wants to lead us more than we want to be led.